Good afternoon, and episode of Community Relations Corner, where we discuss issues of concern to New York's Jewish community and our friends and partners all around the city, the metropolitan area. I'm your host, Michael Miller, the Executive Vice President and CEO of the Jewish Community Relations Council of New York, of the JCRC. And on each episode of Community Relations Corner, we're joined by guests representing the political, the religious, the economic, and the diverse communities that reside in New York and their leadership. Within that leadership are many individuals whom I've gotten to know over my tenure as the CEO of the JCRC. And together we're going to discuss issues of current events impacting New York's Jewish community and its neighbors, as well as the state of our city, the state of our state, the state of the nation, the state of the world, and of course, the state of the borough of Queens. But before we get to our very special guest, whom you can see on the screen, I really need to offer a word of thanks to our sponsor. Our sponsor is, of course, the Free Synagogue of Flushing, Queens, serving the Reformed Jewish community in Queens, New York for over a century. Visit freesynagogueflushing.org and for information about their Shabbat and holiday services, weekly Sunday school, and the beautiful spaces available for public rental. Once again, please visit freesynagogueflushing.org, and we turn seamlessly over to our guest to my left on my screen, and but not necessarily to my left on many other things as well. But my guest is, of course, the newly elected Borough President of the Borough of Queens, Donovan Richards. Welcome, Mr. Borough President.
Thank you for having me. So good to see you all.
Thank you. I got to know you a little bit before you even elected to the city council during or the aftermath of Hurricane Sandy, and it was very evident then as to what your leadership skills were and where you were going to be headed. And fortunately, you were initially elected to the city council before being elected to the borough presidency. And I think that our viewers would like to know more about you, about your upbringing, where you were raised. Were you always a Queensite? Did you go to public school? What were the issues? What were the circumstances, experiences of your youth, which led you or inspired you to join in public service?
Well, thank you for that question. And first, I want to welcome everybody. I heard my good friend Ruth Messenger was on, and Shimmy Pellman, who I know is a board member as well of the JCRC. So I want to thank you for having me. It's been a long journey to get here, Mike. Let me just say that I would have never dreamed or dreamt that I would be your borough president ever in my life. But it was a real unfortunate incident that led me to the city council, and that was the murder of my childhood friend, Darnell Patterson Jr. in my neighborhood in Southeast Queens. You asked, where did I grow up? I grew up geographically everywhere in Southeast Queens because I was born to teenage parents who tried to rub a few nickels together to make sure that their children's life would be better than theirs. So all over Southeast Queens, I was born and bred, still live in Southeast Queens. I live in Rosedale currently. And the journey, as I alluded to, started from the murder of my childhood friend. That's what motivated me to get involved in my community. That's what led me to meeting the former council member who was elected before I took my seat, and then ended up working at the council for nearly a decade. And history from there, I ended up working my way up from a man with equivalent of a broom and a dustpan all the way up to chief of staff. So I knew every facet. When they say, where's the bathroom at City Hall and City Council, like I know where every bathroom is. And, what's been amazing and which has been also a part of the transition is, when I was packing up my office, there was so many memories because there are so many people who knew me there from when I first started to now. So it's really a dream come true to be here. I did attend public school up until Jamaica High School, where unfortunately, there were a lot of challenges for young men like me coming up in the community, a lot of peer pressure. So I ended up in the 11th grade. My parents did the right thing by shipping me up to some boarding school, Redemption Christian Academy in Troy, Albany. There's no place colder than Troy, Albany in New York State. And it was a reform school, actually. And that school really put me on a trajectory to where I'm at now. And it's been an amazing ride. I'll also just add that I've always been passionate about public service. I attended St. Albans Congregational Church in Southeast Queens. It's a non-denominational church. But my pastor at the time growing up sent me to Port-au-Prince, Haiti as a missionary at 13 years old. And I'm like this young kid in Port-au-Prince. I was the youngest person on the trip, actually. And, that sparked my interest in fighting for many of the issues that are still evident here: poverty, housing, ensuring that those things are front and center in everything we do. So that's what inspired me to be here.
Wow, that's quite a story. Thank you very much for sharing that. Just curious, in regard to Port-au-Prince, Haiti, are you still in contact with individuals that you met when you were there, or the Haitian community that resides in Queens?
Yeah, I have a deep rooted relationship with the Haitian community. A lot of the individuals who actually attended that trip with, some of them will call me a lot of them will say I'm their grandson. Some have gone on to heaven, unfortunately, but well, fortunately and unfortunately, we lost some of them. But yeah, I'm still deeply passionate. Actually, we'll be hosting here, which is like so surreal, next week, a Haitian Independence Day celebration. Wow. So that's going to be really rewarding to sort of just connect back with the diaspora of the Haitian people. So yeah, so we still stay connected.
So here you are in the political maelstrom, and through the city council, and now you're the president of the Borough of Queens. You actually have the title president. So what's your vision for Queens, and what do you hope to achieve in this very influential role that you're in?
Well, I sought to be the borough president because our neighborhood deserved an advocate that shares, all of our values. We know Queens is the future, and there's still so many different issues. COVID-19 exacerbated many of the issues that was sort of I like to correlate it to Hurricane Sandy as well. Like, everybody came to Far Rockaway during Hurricane Sandy and like, whoa, the storefronts are empty. Whoa, the storm wiped out this neighborhood. But really, prior to the storm, we were dealing with an economic tsunami in itself. Many of our residents here in Queens spend more than 50% of their income on rent, right? There's always been issues around transportation. When you look at public housing, when you look at the need for criminal justice reform, when you look at how our small businesses were struggling, these issues were already here. And obviously COVID-19 just exacerbated those issues. So, when you say, what is your vision? First of all, I'm proud, and once again, I'll mention Ruth Messenger being on this line today, because we are going to be rolling out a real extensive vision for where the borough needs to go. But I know just off the back, we got to get people to work. Our food pantry lines are wrapped around the corners, triple by triple. And, right now it's just about solving the immediate needs of people, making sure that they have the basics, making sure that they can stay in their homes, even as we battle this, what I presume will be a huge eviction crisis as we move forward. So just looking at stemming the tide right now, I think is critical. And, we'll have some long-term plans that we'll be rolling out in the near future of what can we achieve in the first 100 days. And I'll just say the election in Georgia last night was such an important election for this country and for where we need to go. And I'm hoping that, we'll be able to work with our federal partners, my good friend, Senator Chuck Schumer and Senator Gillibrand, my Congressman Gregory Meeks, to really make sure that federal aid is reaching many pockets of this borough.
Yeah, so when we were planning this conversation, who might have known that we're on the cusp of a potential Democratic majority in the House and in the Senate, as well as the White House, and what the implications are. So let's pull it back once again, as you opened up the door to conversation around COVID-19, around the pandemic. Like, what are some of the more notable health and economic impacts that you have seen from the virus, specifically here in Queens? Let's start now with you referenced it briefly before, small business. What are some of the ways that you have provided support for the small businesses in Queens who have been so hard hit during this pandemic?
Well, I'm happy to say that we hit the ground running as we come in, and we're going to be announcing a really exciting program in about another week. We did a soft announcement just last week with the president of the Economic Development Corporation, James Patchett. We're going to be announcing a new program, a grant program just for small businesses in Queens, a $15 million program, which actually is coming through the Steve Cohen Foundation, the new Mets owner. So I'm really proud of what we're going to do with this specific program, which is going to be geared to, of course, taking care of the immediate needs of the pockets of the borough who were hit hardest by the pandemic. Elmhurst, Corona, Jackson Heights area, Far Rockaway. And then the program will open up to a lot of the other small businesses across the borough. But I think when you talk to small businesses, I mean, we could pursue and talk all the rhetoric we want. But the bottom line is they need grant money to stay open right now. They're fighting a rental crisis. And a lot of the programs that were offered prior to this program did not reach the businesses in Queens. So for instance, the Department of Small Business Services offered a grants and loans program. Do you know that 56 to 57% of that money went to Manhattan? Really? And no offense to Manhattan, but the outer boroughs, last I checked, Queens is the largest economic engine in the city. And we did not get our fair share. So this program, I think, is going to provide some immediate relief to keeping businesses above water. Obviously, there's more work to do for fighting for commercial rent control. And that's, obviously we'll work with our state and city partners on. And then we've continued to do job fairs. We just did a job fair, virtual job fair. I think we had over 400 Queens residents. And people should know that there's still people hiring. So when you see us announce these specific job fairs, I think the next one will be at the end of February, early March, you should really attend. Queens is open for business. And I know there's been a lot of dialogue and debate around it just on this evening, just this afternoon, actually, after we conclude. I'll be heading out to, I think, around Regal Park or somewhere to cut the ribbon on a new Home Depot. I think they have upwards of 200 or 300 jobs that are going to Queens residents. So there's still a lot of work to be done. We're going to have a new IKEA opening on tomorrow morning as well in Queens, and they've already fully staffed up. So, the future is Queens, and we're going to have to fight to make sure that these opportunities for growth are still happening. I'll just also add, just before I close out, that the airports also offer a real key opportunity for continued growth. I've been working very hard with the Port Authority on getting Terminal 1 developed at JFK. There was some hiccups due to COVID-19. So I look forward to continuing to work with them. And that's going to provide hundreds of good jobs and union jobs. And it's also, last I'll just say, it's also about leveraging land use, right? And I've had a lot of different land use projects come to me in the last 2 or 3 weeks. And one of the things we made clear to developers is that, we want to grow, but growth has to be good for everybody. So we're a stickler for ensuring that if you come to Queens and you want to do business, that you're partnering with local organizations and that you're having reporting requirements around where jobs are, where you're hiring at. And like I said, most importantly, working with communities to be hired. We also have just one last project that I did before I left the city council, which I'm really excited about. It's going to be perhaps one of the largest manufacturing deals the city has seen, and we've already broke ground on, and that is Bartlett Dairy coming back to Queens. If you drink Starbucks, you're drinking Bartlett Dairy's milk, and they're coming back and bring about 300 and 400 jobs back to Queens.
Where's that going to be located?
Springfield Gardens, right on the outskirts of JFK. In my prior council district, we got a 50% local hiring agreement, 30% MWBE agreement. We got money for our local school. We got roads repaved. So we're going to leverage these opportunities for Queens. Every deal that comes before our table, we're really going to leverage for responsible growth.
Well, you mentioned Steve Cohen before. You're hitting a couple of home runs, right in the first inning.
Well, I'm hoping the Mets hit some too this year. We
right.
need a championship here.
Oh yeah, oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. With fans, with fans. So you talked about the borough. Obviously, the borough is made up of its constituency. The constituency is highly diverse. And one of those elements in the diversity is, of course, our Jewish community. There's a video circulating about an NYC van traveling around and making announcements in Yiddish to the Jewish community about social distancing, and nobody was paying attention because most of the Jews in Queens don't speak Yiddish. So what are your thoughts on New York City's outreach, or actually Queens's outreach to our community, to the Jewish community, as well as other communities? You've created quite a powerful team within Borough Hall. Your deputy borough president, Rhonda Binda, very well known at the JCRC, a great friend who's a graduate of our One Queens Fellowship. Now We Are All New York Fellowship, traveled to Israel with us on a mission, which we'll get to a little bit later. Anyway, let's talk about the diversity of Queens and outreach to that diversity.
Well, I mean, I get on these calls with the mayor, and I'm just astounded at, and we sort of saw this play out, and as the former councilman of Far Rockaway, I mean, it was playing out right in our community, even during the height of when the city was accusing certain pockets of the city of exacerbating COVID-19 numbers. And I just could not understand why the city would not use partners like the JCRC or the JCCRP out in Far Rockaway. You know, when you talk about being culturally competent in outreach, it means partnership. So if you're not speaking the language of the community, if you're not truly partnering with the community, you never are going to get out of this crisis. The community has to be a part of the solution, and you referenced it in the ridiculous vans driving around. I mean, if you're and I'll talk about Far Rockaway, for instance, because I was there when it was happening. You know, people are in their homes, and you got a van driving down the block. That's not real outreach. You got to work with community stakeholders and leaders. And that's the vein we come with, you know, as we take this seat. And, you know, I of course, applaud the mayor for finally extending more testing into our communities, creating these opportunities. But one of the things we did, even with the Jewish Community Council of the Rockaway Peninsula out there, was, you know, we pushed the city to work with them to figure out some outreach strategies. So we have to do that. And also, I forgot to mention this, I'm the son, a proud son, of someone who is an immigrant who just became a citizen last year. My father, who migrated here from Jamaica many years ago and just never got his citizenship. So he became a U.S. citizen last year. So, you know, we lived this. This was the first election he could actually vote in, my election.
Did he vote for you?
You know, I've been questioning him on that. I think he did. Yeah, you know, I caused him a lot of pain when I was younger, but I think he got over it. So, but you know, in all honesty, it's about partnership, and many of the organizations across this borough have been great partners. This is the most diverse place in the world. 200 countries represented, 190 languages. The city has to make sure they're doing better at communicating with every pocket of our community. And it's something we're even focusing on this office. You know, we're starting to, as a team, as you alluded to, it's coming together. We're internally having these conversations about how do we make sure that we're culturally competent in all of the outreach that we do as well. So the city has to do a better job, even as we talk about the vaccine rolling out as well.
Exactly, that's the next question.
You know, if you don't have validators, if you don't have people in who you're working with, who have the trust of communities, people are not going to take this vaccine.
Right.
So that's the next step, and we'll continue to work with both the governor and the mayor on this.
Are you going to do, whenever your turn is to be vaccinated, will you be doing it publicly and serving as a role model? How do you plan on engaging in the rollout in Queens?
I'm sure my press team has already rolled up my sleeves to do this already. You know, I'm sure Bree is already here, and Chris and Michael are already navigating that for me. But of course, I think it's important for individuals like me. And you know, there's a sordid history when you talk about vaccinations, especially in the African American community because, you know, we've seen some experimentation in the past. And so there is a mistrust, distrust when it comes to vaccination because of the history with the government and vaccinations. But, you know, I was down at, I've been visiting just about every hospital in Queens with Brent Whitesburg on my staff, who actually has roots at the Free Synagogue of Flushing as well. And it's been great to see a lot of the workers there getting vaccinated across, you know, color, across socioeconomic status. So I think people like me are gonna have to be front and center and saying that you can trust this. And there's sunlight at the end of the table. We all have to take responsibility and get the vaccine.
Well, thanks. And just within the framework of the diversity and the array of cultures in Queens, the greatest array in any county, I believe, in the United States and likely the world, is the matter of immigration, how people got here. And I think that's another issue that people are wrestling with. They'll be wrestling with it on Capitol Hill, and it may be a different result than it has been over the past couple of years. But what does immigration mean to the borough of Queens, particularly since Kennedy and LaGuardia airports are both in the borough?
Yeah, Queens is the gateway to the world. And you know, I alluded to my father's story, which is very similar to a lot of immigrants who come into the city. You know, hardworking, and you know, you go to Queens. It's such. When I ran for office, it was amazing because I mean I got a taste of the world in every corner of this borough, and of course that came with gaining more pounds as well, Michael. Thank God for the keto diet. I'm not recommending it, but hey, I'm doing keto and try to stick to it. But you know, Queens is the gateway to the world, and we have a lot of work to do. I'm hoping that this conversation that we've been having for it feels like decades on comprehensive immigration reform actually happens. In Queensborough Hall, one of the things we're going to be focused on is creating an immigrant welcome center. And this is actually a proposal that Assemblymember Catalina Cruz and I have shaped. The proposal she's actually spearheading, but we're helping to shape. We want to have a one-stop shop at Borough Hall where if you have a need for rental assistance, if you have a need for citizenship assistance, social services, you know, education. We want to be a beacon of hope for this world. Queens really has a special story to tell to the world. And we should celebrate, even as there were those who were looking to build walls. You know, here in Queens County, we celebrate our diversity. But we know that even as we celebrate our diversity, that there's still so many challenges around the borough. So I'm looking at funding this initiative fully. You know, we have Susie on my staff, who's done a phenomenal job at leading, you know, our task force here, our immigrant task force here. I just was on the first Zoom call with many of the members just about 2 weeks ago. And, you know, they have so many great ideas of what we can do to make sure we're strengthening this office, but also making sure that we do outreach to different sections of the borough. So still a lot more work to be done there, but the most important thing is getting into the pockets of this borough and speaking their language. And this is why diversity is going to be a central conversation, even as we talk about community boards, right? When we talk about our diversity, it needs to be reflective in everything we do, in our budget, everything. And we'll look forward to the work ahead on this. But I'm really excited about the Immigrant Welcome Center because I think it's really going to be an opportunity here. And also Claire Shulman, who I miss, she was my biggest support. I miss and love her. The former borough president, first woman to be the borough president in Queens County. One of the things she pointed out to me is they used to have actually a welcome center at the airports as well. So when you got off at Kennedy and LaGuardia, there was somewhere a location there where you could actually get information and get greetings into the world, into the capital of the world. So we want to reinvigorate some of those initiatives as we move forward.
I want to let our viewers know that at the funeral for Claire Shulman, the former borough president, I was honored by serving as the rabbi and officiating over that service. And one of the individuals, it was a very, very private service. So one of the individuals who was there was Donovan Richards, and wearing a kippah, a yarmulke, a head covering. I mean, it was very, very meaningful to me that you were there, and I'm sure that from heaven was meaningful to Claire, that you were there offering your final farewell and respect to a woman who accomplished so much as a borough president, is a great role model for you.
Yeah. Yeah, if I could do half of what she did, I've done well. You're talking about someone who built the Queens Hospital Center, which actually was one of the hardest hit hospitals when it came to COVID-19. And, but she built that place. She built so many institutions, and, she called me a week before she transitioned and told me she most likely would not be here to see me sworn in. But she was just such a special person. We had such a special bond.
Right.
And she lives on through this office, the work that we're going to do. We're actually changing the address to Borough Hall. It's going to be 1 Claire Shulman Way as well. But we're going to do a lot more in to celebrate her legacy. I miss her and love her. Get emotional talking about it. She was my first endorsement, by the way. And I can tell you, every morning, I never met a 94-year-old who text messaged so much. Claire Shulman would text me I'll wake up 6 a.m. and I got a text message. She was like my unofficial campaign manager, but I miss her and love her. And we're gonna do right by her and her legacy.
Thank you. And it was really very meaningful to both of us, and hopefully to our viewers as well, just to spend a few minutes reminiscing about Claire. Let's talk now about where people are going to live. You made a brief reference to it earlier about affordable housing. Beyond the pandemic, how do you plan on increasing opportunities for affordable housing in the borough, and most particularly with regard to the senior population here in the borough?
Well, I've done a lot of it in Far Rockaway, and some people are happy about it, some people are not. But the bottom line is you can't resolve this issue by building homeless shelters. You have to build permanent housing. And, I'm proud. I think the blueprint is Far Rockaway. When you look at Queens, how much affordable housing development that I approved in my prior role. I mean, we have about 10,000 units of affordable housing coming up out there with infrastructure investment. And it's not, and Rabbi, I want to say that it's just not about building housing. It's how do you also build community around it? One of the mistakes they made out there is they always built the housing, but never built the resources around it. So every development that comes up, we always like a commercial overlay. We want to create jobs, community facility, new libraries. I'm building a $40 million library out there. We got $139 million in infrastructure, 2 new parks.
Wow.
New safety measures being put on the street so people can cross the street safely. And most importantly, the affordable housing as people struggle. The bottom line is now that, we are going to see a different Washington, D.C., we need subsidy and we need federal assistance desperately. And that's really going to be key to us building out deeper affordability across the borough. And one of the things I'm tasking my team to do and the community boards to do is to identify sites in their specific geographical areas that are right for affordable housing. We have to grow. Right. Queens, and I'm the prior zoning chair of the city council at one point. Right. And a lot of times when you looked at parts of Queens, the zoning resolution was created in 1961. We never upgraded or updated our zoning from 1961 in places like Far Rockaway. I'm sure when we look at Queens Boulevard, we'll see the same thing. So the bottom line is you have to grow. The outer boroughs are the future. This is where you're going to see the most growth. Manhattan is, used to be where to go, but Queens is the future. This is where we're going to see the most growth. So we need to identify those areas, push for subsidy, in which Queens has not historically gotten enough of its fair share when it came to city subsidy to get to deeper affordability. So we're going to be pushing and working perhaps with this mayor as he leaves out, but also the next administration to ensure that those subsidy dollars are being poured here. and most importantly, that we're doing planning from a ground up instead of so top down. One of the things we've seen, which has stymied development, is that a lot of times City Hall comes in, they dictate the plans, and then, you know, the community is upset because they don't feel they really had real stake in the planning. So we want to do a lot of that initial work in-house and then present a plan to city planning into the city of New York, in which they can buy into to grow our borough.
And thank you. And one of the dimensions of building new housing and services is also religious services to ensure that if it's a Jewish community moving in, a synagogue is there, at least one, churches, mosques, the Hindu temples, again, within the framework of the diversity of this borough is not just the buildings, it's the services, but also looking culturally and spiritually at what the needs of the population are.
Exactly. And that's partly why I talked about community facility, which I think is so important, because a lot of times developers are just come in and they just want to do housing. But how do we have them partner? And, you know, I'm very proud of the work. I keep talking about Far Rockaway because it's a blueprint. But, you know, when we were going through the initial planning stages, we had the Jewish Community Council of the Rockaway Peninsula at the table, right? We were able to put them together and strengthen their relationship with the city and the developers. And, you know, anything we do, we need to ensure that that sort of coordination is happening. Because that creates a community rather than just building buildings. You know, we need to build communities.
Yeah, I'm from the Bronx, and the nightmare of the Bronx was co-op city. So there can't be any more co-op cities built in the metropolitan area. And what you're laying out, I think, is really, really crucial. But another dimension.
I was going to say blame Robert Moses, but
well, if we're going to start with Robert Moses, let's start talking about the Cross Bronx Expressway. So. But anyway, let's not get on that tangent. So public safety. You served as the former chair of the New York City Council's Committee on Public Safety. You have a longstanding relationship with NYPD. As a city council member, you established a new precinct, the 116th precinct in Rosedale, and there've been all these calls about defunding the police. Of course, that emerged out of the Black Lives Matter movement. So these matters are all intertwined. So how do you envision the performance of an NYPD? And a very specific question is, how does the borough president, how does Borough Hall liaise with NYPD?
Oh, so I'm going to talk about my personal experience as a Black man, you know, growing up in Southeast Queens, and my first interaction, unfortunately, like many young African Americans in New York City who come from pockets of the inner city and outer boroughs, was getting stopped and frisked at about 13 years old. And, you know, we were just walking to a friend's home, and these detectives swoop around the block. And they say, you fit the description of someone who just robbed the store. And we're saying, what? We just walked from my grandmother's home. The scary thing, and I live to tell this story, was they said, do you have anything in your pocket, Rabbi? So I go in my pocket, and all four of the detectives pulled their guns on us. And by God's grace, you know, the incident did not, you know, like many other incidents, you know, I live to tell the story. But I say that to say that, you know, there's a lot of bridge building that still needs to happen. And, you know, one of the things I often try to do is to take my personal experience, of course, with me, but to also try to listen to all sides. And, you know, we just had this horrific murder of a young man across the street from this office who was going to college. He got killed at the hotel. It was the first homicide in the city. And, you know, I spoke to Commissioner Shea over the weekend, and, you know, just was pushing to let him know, you know, one, of course, we want safe communities, but also, you know, we do need fair policing as well, right? And there's no hypocrisy in saying that. So, you know, there are some people who say, you know, defund the police is a bad thing, and defund the police has different meanings to different people. If you ask 100 people what defund means, you're going to get 100 different answers.
And what does it mean to you?
So what defund means to me is looking at, and you know, as someone who was the prior chairman of the Public Safety Committee, I know where the NYPD's bloat is at, right? And we knew that from the inception that there were issues around overtime and reining that in a little bit more. It didn't mean we were saying they can't have overtime, but there were issues with that. When you talk about mental health services and homeless services, the police department is supposed to be addressing serious crime. Why are we not allowing organizations, perhaps like the JCRC, who, to branch out into these areas to work on mental health issues? We need our community-based organizations to focus on these issues. And too much, as former Commissioner O'Neill would say, everything lands at the police department step, and then it becomes doorstep, and then it becomes a criminal justice issue. Right. And once you enter the system, a lot of times these low-level offenses, you end up with a life sentence, unfortunately. So how do we prevent people from getting a life sentence because they got arrested for low-level marijuana, for instance, right? So the key is to ensure that those social services are being provided. In
mental health,
we're building housing, but the NYPD's budget, I can tell you, and they were not always as transparent as I wanted them to be, needed to be reined in a lot more. And now let me just move into the future. Where do we need to go? We are all talking past each other right now, and that's been the problem. And when you all are talking past each other, there's an old saying, actually, when the elephants fight, the ants get trampled on. And right now, what you're seeing is this uptick in shootings, because guess what? Everybody knows that it's like having a 5-year-old. The two parents are having an argument, they're going to take advantage. So that's what's happening on our streets right now. And until we all start to talk with one another, to say, hey, we do need each other. We do need safe policing. We do need safe streets. We do need fair policing. We're going to continue to see this violence escalate. So the bottom line is we gotta fund programming. As long as you have a food crisis, a housing crisis, compounded on top with this pandemic, you're going to have a problem. And I pointed this out to the mayor even before the pandemic, as we were going into these budget challenges, that if we don't fund things like the summer youth program, you're going to have a lot of kids who are going to be recruited by the gangs, and you're going to run into these issues. So a lot more work to be done. I'm happy to say it seems like we are starting to turn a corner, but where do we go as a borough? We got to work with all our precincts. I want to see the NCO program working. I want to see community-based programs funded. I want to see our food pantries funded. I want to see housing. I want to see, criminal restoration or restorative justice measures happening that keep people from entering the system in the first place. So a lot more work to be done there, but I think we can all get there if we work together.
And gun control, the cross-state laws, do they need to be retooled?
Absolutely. When you look at all of this gun violence happening, I always say, I don't know any gun manufacturers in East New York or in Far Rockaway or in the Bronx or Southeast Queens, right? These guns are coming in through the I-95 pipeline. And part of the problem is, as the DA will even tell you, District Attorney Melinda Katz and I talk about this a lot. Southern states like Virginia and Georgia, where all these guns are coming up north, there needs to be change in the way that's happening, and that we can only do that. You can only do that with federal intervention. We need tighter gun laws, and without that happening, these guns are going to continue to find their way into the inner city. Right. I'll also add, let me just add one more thing, the crisis management system, cure violence programs, which, over the summer, a lot of people took shots at them. But I've been out on the streets with the cure violence groups, which are people from local communities who are out, helping take guns out of people's hands to diffuse a lot of the violence. We need to see more of that programming increased in communities as well. We have Life Camp in Southeast Queens. We have 696 in Queensbridge. Those violent interrupters also play a key role in tamping down the violence. The police department can't resolve crime alone. It takes community and the police to do it.
Yeah, I was about to say before that I know that Senator Chuck Schumer, who again is on the cusp of becoming the majority leader, has been very outspoken in regard to control of assault weapons and preventing weapons, gun violence on the streets. And it's wonderful to have a spokesperson down in DC as the leader of the United States Senate. Yeah. I just want to go back for just one step in regard to NYPD, and that's communication. So you mentioned that you have spoken with Belinda, our good friend Belinda Cass, the district attorney. Is there open communication between Borough Hall and NYPD with the borough commanders, or how does that work?
Oh, well, I mean, well, the beauty is coming out of as the chairman of the Public Safety Committee, there's not a commander in Queens I don't know. Like, I've worked with each and every one of them. I was just actually down at the 102 precinct this weekend, speaking with the commander. We had a horrific hit and run incident that impacted especially the Guyanese community. A young lady was hit and killed and left on the streets. And you know, I talk about that because there has to be a relationship, right? And that commander was able to comfort the family and comfort and reassure many of the organizers that they are working hard on this investigation. But the only way to ensure through these incidents that we can move forward and build trust is through those relationships. So I bring that to the table already. I literally got a call from my commander from the 101 right before this episode. And like I said, my relationship with the NYPD has been complicated at times, but it doesn't mean that we don't pick up the phone.
That's important.
And even through disagreement, it doesn't mean you can't pick up the phone. And that's what I think we're bringing to Borough Hall. Not to say Melinda didn't have that, she did have that, but we're bringing that because of the relationships we've had prior to this.
Yeah, communication is key. And speaking of communication, if we're talking about gun violence, we need to talk about hate. And we're talking about hate, we need to talk about anti-Semitism. There was an incident just a few weeks ago of anti-Semitic graffiti being utilized, vandalized a couple of fences. I believe it was in Rego Park. What can be done? What kind of messages can come out of Borough Hall to eliminate, not just to tamp it down, but to eliminate these hateful expressions? There are biased crimes across the city. The majority of them are against our community, are anti-Semitic, but there are also hate crimes against other communities as well. So what role, again, as from the bully pulpit, let us say, of Borough Hall, can the borough president play?
Well, the first thing is everybody has to raise their voice. Whatever we see bias, whether it impacts the Jewish community, the Muslim community, I don't care where you're from, what you look like, we have to call it out. And we were one of the first to do that, along with my colleague, Assembly Member Dan Rosenthal. You know, in the council, I did a lot of work around this because we started to watch the numbers, and we can see that there were a lot more hate crimes creeping up in the city, especially last year. Anti-Semitism creeped up. Yes. Jewish community was the lead in the community. This year, actually, early on, the Black community actually also had a huge uptick in bias crimes against it. So one of the things I love doing in the council was working across lines with everybody. I worked with Councilmember Chaim Deutsch and actually Councilmember Mark Levine, and we actually shepherded in some legislation and passed it in the council, which created the Office to Prevent Hate Crimes.
Yes, I know.
And what that office is tasked with is, one, when a hate crime happens, the community needs to be alerted right away. And that wasn't happening as fast as we wanted to see. You'll also notice now, we also work with Councilmember Deutsch on this as well, and also Councilmember Mark Traeger out of Brooklyn, to ensure that hate crimes now are reported on the ComStat that the NYPD reports out to you. So before, when the NYPD would go into ComStat, and that's where, all your commanders gather to go through crime statistics and everything else on a monthly basis, they didn't have hate crimes as a part of that. So now when they go in, they now have to be held accountable when they see a certain uptick in hate crimes in their specific command. So it starts there with also ensuring that the NYPD is more transparent and also accountable when these hate crimes happen. But also through that office, two other things that were important to us, and I think I was the prime sponsor of one of these pieces, was making sure that there's more education happening in our schools. Yeah. Our children often live in neighborhoods, live on different corners of the different parts of the street, across the street from each other, but never interact with each other. We need to see a lot more planning and more events and cultural competency outreach between communities and ourselves. I talked about us celebrating our diversity in Queens. We can celebrate it, but we also have to come together in a real way. And that's one of the reasons I love doing all of these different events. We had one of my first events, actually, we lit a menorah right outside Borough Hall, right? I mean, I think that sends such a strong message that the first African-American man to be elected borough president is out with the Jewish community, lighting a menorah at Borough Hall with Shimmy Pellman and so many others, right? So I think we need to do a lot more of that, bridge building, talking to each other, and I think that we'll start to make a dent in this. But it takes us all getting to know one another in our cultures. And that's why I also just go back to ensuring that the Immigration Welcome Center and that committee also is doing a lot of work as well.
Right. That's so important. And outreach, we talked about it before, community outreach, and knowing who, like Shimmy, who's, as you mentioned before, is a distinguished member of our board of directors, of knowing who the leadership is, and whether it's the Guyanese or South Asian community, whether it's the Muslim community, regardless of the Latino community, the Hispanic community, the very diverse Black community. It isn't just African-American community. Just knowing who the leaders are, I think, is really key to communicating on the grassroots level. So let me jump a little bit overseas for a moment, talk about Israel. Back in February of 2015, you were on a JCRC mission to Israel. Actually, I looked at the photos before the episode began. I'll send a couple of them to you afterwards. What was that experience like for you? Was that the first time that you were in Israel, in the Holy Land? And what kind of memories do you have? Maybe the one or two top experiences that you endured during that, or your experience during that trip.
Oh, I mean, there were too many to name, and that was such a deep spiritual trip. I mean, going into Jerusalem was just, I never would have dreamt I would be walking the streets, of which I've read in the Bible, right? I thought it was so deeply spiritual. And there are some people who think it's they've called it a propaganda trip, but what was the most interesting part, and which I appreciate the JCRC doing, is, we went to Ramallah, we went to Jerusalem, we traveled Israel, we heard from different factions within Israel. And I think that's what stuck with me. And, the yearn for peace was the thing that I think I remember the most about the trip. I think leaving there, I left with the presumption that it is very complicated. It is really complicated. But being on the trip with all of my colleagues from all different political spectrums, from some people who will be considered progressive, and I remember David Greenfield being on it, Eric Ulrich, my Republican colleague. So it was really an amazing trip where I got to learn a great deal about Israel. There's nothing like going, and I remember us being in the museum and just seeing the pictures of all of those who were killed during the Holocaust. Something like that never leaves you.
Yad Vashem.
Exactly. So I never forget those memories. And this is one of the reasons, even as I came back, we had such a deeper bond with we always had a great relationship with the Jewish community, but it was a deeper bond after that trip. So a lot of great memories. And
you had a snowstorm.
And I remember, right. And it shut down the entire city, I remember, because in Israel they're not used to snowstorms. So apparently I think it was like you had like one little truck and and it was like an inch of snow, I remember. And I remember, yes, and we walked through Jerusalem that day, and it was great. It was just a great experience. And the food is great, by the way, too, and the wine. But I'll leave that point.
I'm not going to debate that point. I'm 100% with you on that. But that's the learning, the educational side of it, the historical side of it. But there's also a political side of it as well. And as you know, the Democratic Socialists of America, DSA, developed a questionnaire for candidates running for city council, including in the district that you left to become the borough president. And one of the questions that they asked was, would you pledge not to travel on trips, essentially, that JCRC takes to Israel? What was your reaction to that?
I mean, I immediately denounced it along with my colleague, now Congressman Richie Torres, because,
Right.
we felt strongly about, one, as I talked about, and I think they just, a lot of people just made the assumption that the JCRC just takes you to hear from, one faction opposed to other, or you're not talking to Palestinians, but we really got to speak to everyone. And I think, ignorance is bliss. And if you don't travel, if you don't speak to different people, even despite having different opinions, you could never learn, you could never blossom. So I urge everybody to take the trip. Matter of fact, I look forward to, God willing, after this pandemic, going back to Israel again, because I think, to educate yourself, you have to be in it. There's one thing to read a book, there's one thing to read propaganda, but it's another thing to actually talk to people. And I think that that's what we got when we got to Israel. And I'll be honest with you on this line, when we got the trip, I never thought as they made this presumption that we would actually go to Ramallah and places like that, right? And I thought that changed, I think, a lot of people's worldview, even on the trip of the JCRC. Right? Because there was just this notion that, we would just speak to this side and not the other side. But the mere fact that the JCRC made that effort to make sure we spoke to Palestinians and everybody else, it made a big difference in our worldview of the JCRC, but also the people of Israel.
Thank you very, very much for that. We believe in diversity too, and the diversity of views, and ensuring that those who do travel with us to Israel have as broad an experience as possible. And we know that we have succeeded when somebody leaves the country and says, it's complicated. If that conflict would be resolvable, it would have been resolved years ago.
Exactly.
But it's complicated. And thank God we believe that there's still hope, and we hope and pray for peace in the Middle East and all around the world. But back home again to the DSA. So the DSA has endorsed so far, I believe, is 6 candidates for city council. What issues are there between mainstream Democrats such as yourself, who are also progressive, and the DSA?
I mean, listen, I think, there are always different ways to arrive at trying to resolve and get to solutions, right? And, I'm, as you just said, I used to be the co-chair of the Progressive Caucus of the City Council. The bottom line is that, when I became so let me back up and just say, before I was a council member and learned the nuts and bolts of government, it was easy to say, we need every project that comes into the city needs to be 30% AMI and but you got to figure out how to pay for it. Right. So I don't think there's that much of a difference in ideology in saying that, well, we want people to have food, we want people to have housing. We just differ on how do we get there. And on, how do you get there with real solutions? And I point back to Far Rockaway again, right? How we took that opportunity and leverage it, not just to build a new community, but to also fix many of the issues that were apparent before, right? When we talk about public housing, we were able to leverage, after Sandy, getting $1 billion spent in public housing developments in the Rockaways. You go there now, you're going to see new boilers getting put up, right? So I think, a lot of times we all agree that everybody should have good health care and all of these, and good housing, healthy housing. We should have more hospitals. No one should be hungry. The question is how we get there. So I think that's the big differentiation. And a lot of times, you know, it's okay to be an idealist, but we work within a framework of government as well. And you got to figure out how to push government to do more. And I think as more people, you know, it's easy to, and I think even for some of the DSA candidate, you know, individuals who might have gotten elected already, right? When they got into state government, they now have to play within a certain system. So either you learn how to play within the system and push the system a little bit, but also learn how to work with people, or you end up achieving nothing. You know, so I would rather get something done. And I'm not saying, you know, pointing at them and saying they don't want to get anything done. But the bottom line is you better figure out how to work and negotiate and work within the system that you're dealt. And yes, push them at appropriate times.
So speaking about the hand, since we're running out of time, so is there about the hand that you're dealt? There's going to be a new he or she or he in City Hall in just a year's time. So what are you looking for, Mr. Borough President of Queens? What are you looking for in the next mayor of the city of New York?
Competency. You know, I talked about the nuts and bolts of governing and delivering services. You know, the individual I'm looking for is he or she should be a bridge builder. And it, you know, one of the things I think that it's gotten lost in politics is that people have their ideology, and if they don't like what you say, they're ready to come at you 1,000%, you know, and knock you out rather than being able to hear each other out. So I'm looking for someone who could build consensus, but most importantly, who can manage the city. You know, you're hearing this all over, you know, our garbage cans are overflowing. You know, we're having issues with public safety, right? You know, yes, there needs to be accountability within the department, but we also need a strong leader who's also going to be able to go out into the streets and bring communities together to make a real public safety plan. You know, we need a fairer society. But the bottom line is we need somebody who's going to be able to make decisions, to lead with conviction, and to lead our city, to be the biggest cheerleader. I mean, nobody's going to be the biggest cheerleader of Queens than me, but we need somebody who's going to be the biggest cheerleader across this city, and to push for more job opportunities, and to also stand up and make unpopular decisions and not be afraid to do that. You know, I allude to Amazon and other projects that have come that have not come to fruition because I think, you know, we had and I don't want to say tepid leadership, but we need more boldness. But also, as I alluded to, you need people who can build bridges as well and be able to talk to those factions. So I'm hoping whoever comes in as the next mayor and the next council members who come in, council members who come in, that they'll be able to work across the aisle and work to get something done for the people of the city. Because if we're not focused on the people of the city and we're focused on politics, we're failing at our jobs.
Wow. Thank you so much. I really can't thank you. I can't express my gratitude sufficiently for your being my guest on this week's Community Relations Corner. I believe this is the 18th program. The number 18 is a very special number in the Jewish world. It stands for the word chai, which means life. So you've given certainly life to our Community Relations Corner and bringing a lot of life to Queens as well. I'm going to just thank our sponsor again and think about what line of last message you want to leave with our viewers. So let me thank our sponsors, the Free Synagogue of Flushing, serving the Reformed Jewish community in Queens, New York, and whose family Brett was affiliated with for many years, for over a century. Visit freesynagogueflushing.org to learn about a wide array of programming in the beautiful sanctuary, social hall, and meditation garden are available for rent. Visit freesynagogueflushing.org to learn about their Shabbat, their Sabbath, holiday services, and weekly Sunday school. Once again, visit freesynagogueflushing.org, and to the Borough President, visit freesynagogue.flushing, which we hope we can arrange for you to see the beautiful sanctuary, their stained glass sanctuary. Our shout outs to the President of the Synagogue, Ed Schauder, who's a member of our board, their cantor and executive director, Alan Brava, their Rabbi Jeffrey Gale, to my producers, my 3Gs, Noam Gilbert, our Chief Operating Officer, to Rebecca Grossman, and to Jennifer Glick. And before I turn it to the borough president for a last word, I didn't ask this as a question, so I'm going to make it as a statement. You are truly a role model. You mentioned a number of times that you're the first African-American, the first Black borough president, male borough president of Queens. And I believe that you don't necessarily have to be a Black African-American kid to look up to you, Donovan Richards. You truly are a standout public official, elected official, and a mensch, a real human being, wonderful person. So with that, now that I've inflated your head, with that,
my wife deflates it. Don't worry.
Is there a last word that you'd like to share with our viewers?
Well, this is going to be, I think, my 18th year in government. So it's funny that you said that, Robbie. So it's full circle. But I just want to thank you all. I look forward to continuing to have a strong bond with the Jewish community. I look forward to listening, most importantly, to everyone. You know, I want to hear everyone's experiences. I want to know what we can do better, how we can build a more equitable and safe and fairer borough. And I am elated to be here and just so proud to represent this borough. As I said earlier, Queens is the future, but we can only build a better future together. And I know we're going to do that moving forward. So thank you all for having me. And of course, Brent is going to get me to the synagogue as well. I'm sure he's having me go everywhere, by the way. I think I've done like 20 hospitals and there are only 9 in Queens already. But Brent has been great and his family's great as well. So I look forward to the work ahead. Have a great Shabbos. Look forward to working with many of you in the near future. And I hope that I meet each and every one of you in the near future as well as we get through this.
Thank you.
So stay safe.
Thank you. One of the nicknames for Queens is the world's borough. The world's borough has a world-class borough president. Our thanks to our audience for joining us live, and for those who will be seeing us on video on various platforms, Facebook and YouTube, et cetera, et cetera. I'm Michael Miller, the CEO of the JCRC, and we look forward to seeing you next time on Community Relations Corner. Goodbye, everybody. Shalom, and thank you.
Take care.